So, hi everyone, and welcome to this last and final episode of the Biome podcast with Robi and Emma. And it's the last species reintroduction we're going to do. But don't worry, we've got a fantastic one for you today. Today we are going to talk about the reintroduction of the wolf to Britain, the species that started the whole conversation about rewilding and reintroduction, and probably the most controversial species. Let's discount the wolverine because that was a bit way out.
And the bears.
Yeah, but everyone has an opinion on wolves, so we hope we're going to do wolf reintroduction justice for you today.
Yeah, and also, like you just said, Robi, it's a very controversial topic, and obviously people are going to have very divided opinions about this. So we would really, really love to hear what you have to think about wolves. So if you have any experiences with wolves, if you've seen them in the wild, if you had a cool interaction with them, just tell us about it. We'd love to hear. And also just what your opinions are on bringing them back to the UK. Should we have them? Should we not? Because unlike something like bears and wolverines, which we've talked about before, this is I would say there have been serious efforts to try and reintroduce them, and there are some people who really want them back. So we're curious what you guys think about it. So please comment, and we'll have a discussion with you guys about that. So do you want to, Robi, just explain like how the structure is going to work this today?
So just so you can skip bits you're bored about. If anyone skips evolution, I will be very annoyed. But Emma's going to begin with telling you what is a wolf. In case you may not know, I actually did know what a wolf was, but we're going to start with what is a wolf. We're going to do a teeny bit of wolf evolution just because it's so interesting. We're going to go through their behaviour, their social behaviour, their habitat. Have you ever wondered why wolves howl? I have. I learned something new when I was researching this. And then we'll go through their extinction in the UK. We're going to lay out, in as balanced terms as we can, the pros to reintroduction and all the good reasons why we should bring wolves back. And then we're also going to tell you all the cons to reintroduction. Why might wolves be a bad idea in Britain? Why shouldn't we bring them back? So we're gonna give you both sides of the debate. And then at the end, we're going to kind of go through some solutions to some of the cons to kind of present our own opinions. We're going to end this with what we think. I'm sure most of you could probably guess what we think about wolf reintroduction. And then at the end, please do comment. We'd love to hear what you guys think about wolves.
Yeah, so all sounds really exciting to me. Hopefully you guys don't skip any of it. But so to start off with, what is a wolf? I feel like, maybe the term wolf is used a bit too loosely in terms of
I think it is,
species that aren't actually wolves. So say something like the Ethiopian wolf. Kind of what we're referring to here is the grey wolf. So that is Canis lupus of the genus. It's the family Canidae.
The family is Canidae,
So it's what we're talking about with the grey wolf. It's a large canine that's native to Eurasia and North America, and it's the largest extant member of Canidae. So again, if any of you have seen wolves, please let us know. I haven't personally in the wild. You haven't seen them, have you, Robi?
I haven't seen them, no. I tried. But in case you don't know what a wolf looks like, here is a wolf on your screen now. This is a grey wolf. I'm sure it's very familiar to you all. And you can quite easily tell that it is the biggest member of Canidae. There's nothing dog-like out there that's bigger than a grey wolf. Yeah.
And its size is very, very impressive. But within sort of this Canidae family, it's a very, very broad group. And so within that group, you've got things like domestic dogs, coyote, African golden wolf, Ethiopian wolves, and golden jackals. So you think that that's quite a diversity in not only morphology, but where they are in the world and their behaviours. But this episode, we're talking about the grey wolf. So do you want to talk a bit about their evolution, Robi?
I do. You know I love evolution. I'm gonna mention some other prehistoric wolf species which people might be interested in. And just a note, as Emma said, wolves are Canis lupus, but there are plenty of other wolf-like animals in the genus Canis. So coyotes, for example, are also Canis. They're Canis latrans. And so when we're talking about fossil wolf species, we can very easily assign them to the genus Canis. But if we give them a different specific name, like Canis chiliensis from northern China, we would probably consider that. We'd probably name it a wolf, but we don't really know. And some of these are very small animals, which we're calling wolves, but actually they're the size of a fox. So today we're going to talk about wolves as grey wolves. And when I'm talking about evolution, just keep that in mind. And I'll probably say something like a prehistoric canis. So Canidae as a family, canines, they actually evolved in North America. They're a North American origin, around 34 million years ago in the Oligocene, which was way, way, way back then. And for most of their history, they've been quite small, like fox-sized or smaller. But all modern wolves, and obviously dogs, because dogs are domesticated wolves, descend from a common ancestral wolf population that existed around 20,000 years ago. So they're not that old a species. They're about as old as we are as a species.
So the ancestor would have been something quite small then of the grey wolf and domestic dogs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. And grey wolves, modern grey wolves, and domestic dogs are both descended from a now extinct ancestral grey wolf. So we say, dogs are just domestic wolves, but they share a common ancestor, and so the wolves which became dogs no longer exist. And so fast forward to the early Pleistocene, the beginning of the so-called Ice Ages, and the genus Canis exploded and it went everywhere. So it came to North America, you had loads of groups in Europe. And again, this is kind of difficult to say whether they were wolves or not. They were definitely large-bodied Canis species. Canis falconeri, Canis etruscus, which we call the Etruscan wolf. But it's very hard to say if it was a wolf or not. But by the Middle Pleistocene, the modern wolf, Canis lupus, had emerged. And it was probably descended from the Etruscan wolf in Europe through the Mosbach wolf, and then lupus, the species, emerged. And you went through a couple of ancient lupus subspecies as well before getting to the main wolf. And so the last very interesting thing I would like to tell you about with Wolfian's evolution, which was actually the most interesting thing for me I found out when researching this, is that modern wolves are not actually as carnivorous as they used to be. So we think of wolves as these, bison-killing predators. But in the Pleistocene, there was actually two ecotypes of grey wolf, the Beringian wolf and the megafaunal wolf. And these were just a bit more robust. They were more carnivorous. They probably fed exclusively on megafauna, like mammoths and things like that. And they formed a single continuous population across the kind of the boreal zone in the Arctic. But when the megafauna went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, so did these wolves. And so the modern Arctic wolves are actually descended from lupus, which lived in southern regions and only moved north when these kind of mega hunting wolves went extinct. And so now we have the modern wolf.
That's really it. So would you say that their diet has changed sort of as a result of megafauna going extinct? That would have been a shift towards more omnivory in a way.
Absolutely, and it's probably why those two carnivorous morphs of wolf went extinct, whereas the modern wolf is a lot more adaptable, really. And those two populations were probably linked really tightly to stuff like horses and camels and bison, whereas the modern wolf can go anywhere and do anything, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possibly a good link to talk about, like you were saying, their distribution is just huge. So to talk a bit about their habitat and kind of where they're found around the world. So when we're talking about the grey wolf, it's so adaptable, as you've probably just heard from sort of the account of their evolution. They are found in a variety of habitats all across the world. So it's across the Holarctic and the Nearctic. Holarctic, that's the northern hemisphere as a whole, if I think I'm picturing that right.
Holarctic is northern Eurasia, so the old Arctic, so Europe and Asia. Yeah. And then Nearctic is northern North America. So it's kind of the two northern bits.
Yeah. But I think if we look back to some of the wolves that you were talking about, Robi, sort of ancestrally, it's said that kind of at their peak, grey wolves had the greatest global range of any mammal before Homo sapiens. Wow. So they were found from Portugal to Mexico and in every habitat apart from tropical rainforests and the deep desert. So that just gives you an indication of how adaptable this species is. And so currently they can be found between sea level and 3,000 metres in altitude. So again, huge range there in altitude. And like I mentioned with the sort of the habitats they live in, just to list a few where they can be found. So they can be in places like forests, wetlands, shrubland, grasslands, Arctic tundra, coastal environments, pastures, mountains. And I find that fascinating. I love coastal wolves. I find them incredible, the idea that you've got them adapted to this coastal environment. And obviously they're influenced, where they are in the world is influenced by things like abundance of prey and climate, if there's a lot of roads, if there's a lot of people. So that's just something to consider with reintroduction as we talk about that later, that those are factors that would influence
absolutely
where they're found.
And it's probably good to note that all of these different habitats, a lot of them tend to have different subspecies of grey wolf. So the grey wolf, Canis lupus, actually has about 30 recognised subspecies dotted all across the world, and several have gone extinct, but most of them still remain. And so you can tell by looking at the genetics quite a lot about them. So the Himalayan and Indian wolves are the most basal. They branched off first, whereas wolves in North America are actually quite derived and quite recent emergence as distinct subspecies.
And I think a lot of that, like we've said in other podcasts as well, would link to ecotype. So those subspecies are often associated with particular habitats, they have particular diets, and therefore their morphology reflects that. So, I mean, as well as habitat range, also we can also talk about their diet. Like you were saying, Robi, historically they were maybe more carnivorous, whereas now some of them, I would say them, we should consider them omnivores, I think, if we're being accurate.
Omnivores, but like very high up the food chain omnivores.
Yeah.
Apex omnivores, I guess. And I think before they used to be a lot more carnivorous, and now they're omnivorous, but now they've specialised a bit more on ungulates. So things like deer and bison. Before they probably had a larger prey base, but now they've as they've gotten a bit broader in terms of what they eat, they've actually specialised on certain kinds, I think.
Yeah, so I guess if they're sort of primary prey would be things like the wild ungulate, so like you were saying, the deer, wild boar, things like that in Eurasia, and then North America, kind of elk, moose, caribou, bison, things like that. But obviously that's dependent on if they can catch it, if they are sort of proficient enough hunters to do that, and availability. So they will also take smaller things which may be easier to catch, like hares, rodents, waterfowl. And then obviously the coastal ones will be taking things like salmon. So the ones in Alaska, salmon makes up around 20% of their diet. So it is a substantial
Fishing
amount.
wolves.
I love that. I have a thing about wolves that live on the coast. I really, really like them.
And obviously, I think we're going to call them omnivores. And so they do eat a lot of plant matter. So they like fruits, apples, pears, figs, melons, berries, cherries. Oh, that rhymed. Apples, figs. Anyway, I digress. And they've got quite a broad diet. They also do eat a bit of grass. And it's thought that this is probably due to mineral content and stuff like that, nutrient stuff they can't get from meat. But again, that kind of reflects why wolves have this massive range across the world, because they can live anywhere and eat basically anything. And part of the reason they're so successful is obviously because they hunt in packs.
Yeah. And also just to mention sort of their intelligence and kind of their ability, they like to communicate within a pack. The sort of relationships between individuals is very important, and experiments have even shown that they can exhibit sort of foresight and understanding and kind of planning, which is very, very complex kind of mammalian behaviour.
Planning. Oh, wolves that plan. That's. Ooh, I love
Scheming
it. I want to
wolves.
see them planning. Scheming wolves. They're plotting.
So do you want to talk a bit about like how they're interacting kind of with other carnivores or other species?
It's probably good to be aware of when we talk about reintroduction? Like, how would they react with other things that are in the landscape? So obviously wolves are the largest canid species, so they do dominate other canines. They regularly kill coyotes, things like coyotes and foxes, displacing them. In Europe, golden jackals, they have the same thing. They will kill those. Arctic foxes as well. Bears are a little different. Brown bears tend to dominate wolves in carcass disputes, and you can see why, because brown bears are heckin' massive.
Yes.
And wolves will typically give way to brown bears. Black bears, it's different because they're a bit smaller. Wolves will dominate over black bears. But with things like felids, it's a little different. This is the whole cat-dog relationship here. So, you know, most of the time I suspect a dog would, you know, take a domestic cat. But there are some big cats out there. Wolves compete with lynx and tend to displace them. And wolf packs can actually displace puma, or mountain lions, you'd call them in America.
Because are they... Puma, were they bigger than grey wolves, or similar size?
An individual puma would probably just be... It would certainly be longer and heavier. It might not be taller.
Maybe more muscular. I feel like it's very muscularly built, pumas.
Yeah, wolves are quite lean. And one-on-one, a puma will take a wolf. And they have been known to kill them. But there is only one animal which is, you know, a predatory threat to adult wolves and wolf packs, and these are Siberian tigers in the Russian Far East, where they cause localized extinction among wolf populations because there's this fantastic story of this tiger figuring out where the wolf den was pupping, went in, ate the pups, and waited for the wolf pack to come home from hunting, and one by one it killed each wolf.
Oh my goodness.
So don't mess with the Siberian tiger.
I was going to say, we're worried about wolves. I feel like those are predators which we would actually have to be concerned about.
Yeah. And so obviously they're a social animal. When we talk about reintroduction, we wouldn't bring back one wolf, we'd bring back an established pack. In North America, pack size is on average 8, and in Europe it's about 5. And these are territorial animals, so they live with their pack in this large territory. On average, territory is about 35 kilometers squared. It will get much bigger. The biggest territory ever recorded in Alaska was 6,272 kilometers squared. But you expect that because there's nothing in Alaska.
Because also I was reading with regards to territories that they tend to establish territories that are actually larger than what they need because it ensures that they have enough prey abundant. So they don't exactly need it all, but it sort of ensures that they can secure food year round.
Oh, that's cool. So if we did bring wolves back to the UK, they almost certainly wouldn't need a 6,270 kilometre square territory. It would probably be something in the range of 35 kilometres squared for a pack. And obviously living in a pack means they're so social. And howling, everyone's heard a wolf howl. We're going to play you one now. So this is how they do communicate. So they don't howl at the moon.
Do you know where that came from then? Because obviously maybe that was mythology or kind of legend with the whole werewolf thing.
And I think before that it was Norse mythology, because in Norse mythology, the Ragnarok, the end of the world, doomsday, is signalled by a wolf eating the moon. So I wonder if that's filtered in Germanic tribes and stuff.
So why do they howl if it's not to the moon?
Well, it seems that it's a kind of a social thing. So you'd howl to assemble the pack, which is quite cool, and then you'd howl when you're going on a hunt or to sound an alarm, and obviously keeping in contact as you're fanning out looking for bison. And it's quite an eerie thing. So we were in Canada at a place called Algonquin National Park, and you drive up to this hillside and you stop and you get out the car and it's pitch black, and the ranger who's with you howls into the night, and after a moment the wolves howl back, and they're like 35 miles away, but just hearing them, it genuinely sends a shiver down your spine. It's so eerie.
Oh, I bet that was just such an incredible experience, like you say, because obviously if it's dark your senses are heightened, and I think there is something like you just heard with the call. It's that possibly the knowledge that it is this big apex predator out there, and you can't see it, but it's just there howling. That's incredible.
I did feel suddenly very far down the food chain. So, we hope this means you now appreciate wolves for the magical animals they are. But unfortunately, we've lost our wolves, haven't we?
Yes, we have, and there's a bit of debate as to how and when. So I was trying to figure out when the last one was actually in the UK. And so some reports are in Sutherland in 1621. So apparently
so that was not that long ago.
No, so that was one record, and then another one was in Scotland in the 1700s. But basically, the conclusion was the truth is no one knows when the last wolf was killed, where it lived, what it was doing. So the best answer I can probably give you is that the last one in Britain probably was kind of living on the periphery, like they're quite elusive on their own anyway, you wouldn't see them, and it probably was just avoiding humans and then died of old age when it couldn't find a mate, or if it succumbed to something like disease.
Well, that's quite sad.
I know,
It's
it's sad to think of it just wandering, but I think the fact is no one actually knows, because no one was really no one realised, I don't think, that their numbers had declined to the point of being there being none left. And it's not just in the UK, so they've gone extinct in Japan as well, and that was as a result of hunting. They were driven to extinction in 1910, so a lot later.
And actually in Japan, that was 2 endemic subspecies of grey wolf which went extinct and have now gone forever. We've lost those 2 subspecies.
Because I haven't been keeping up with wolf reintroduction in Japan, but I don't know if that is something that they're looking to bring them back or not.
They found a photo they found some guy photographed these strange wolf-like animals in the mountains, and so there's this big thing in Japan like, oh, is there one pack left? And some of the photos look pretty convincing, actually. They're high definition photos of an animal very close by, which looks to me like a wolf. So maybe there is some wolves still hiding in the mountains of Japan.
I mean, could be, like we said with the whole thing in Britain, they're thought to have gone extinct, but when you have relic populations that are maybe on the outskirts, you wouldn't know that they're there. But basically, in the rest of Europe, things are maybe slightly more positive for the wolf, in the sense they haven't been reduced entirely to extinction. So basically, during the 20th century, there was a lot of persecution and hunting of wolves, and they were basically driven to these remnant populations in places like Spain, Italy, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe. But it was kind of a fraction of what they used to be, which is, I don't know, it shows how we've driven these species to just these small remnant populations.
It's funny how it's always those spots. Spain, Italy, Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, those are always the refuges. That was for beavers and bison and lynx. And during the Ice Ages, they were glacial refuges. What is it about these weird little peninsulas that just always save the last of these animals? Bears had a thing there.
Yeah.
I smell a dissertation. So, obviously, across Europe, the story of the wolf is actually a success story now. They're massively rebounding back across Europe. Get wolves everywhere. Almost all European countries have wild wolves now. We don't. So why do we need wolves back, do you think?
I mean, so I'll start, there's an interesting quote that someone used and just sort of highlighted the extent of what we lost when we did lose the wolves. So it was a quote by Jim Crumley, who was the author of a book called The Last Wolf. And he said, "From the moment the last wolf died, nature in the Highlands, in all of Scotland or Britain, lurched out of control. It is still out of control, and we will remain out of control until the day the wild wolf is put back."
Wow, he really hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, he wasn't messing around, was he?
No, not at all. And I think, I don't know, just the fact that it doesn't have to be an apex predator that regulates ecosystems. It can be things further down the food chain. But because they are at the top, especially in the UK, we don't have any big carnivores or anything left. So we've lost a lot of sort of ecosystem services and management of things like prey. So if we consider something like deer, so red deer, roe deer in Scotland, for example, these animals now have no natural predators and are now out of control. So they are causing huge extensive landscape degradation, forest loss, and sort of collapsing trophic cascades. And
how are they doing that? Is it the fact that is it their grazing essentially?
But yeah, basically their grazing behaviours and the fact that there's nothing to control them naturally other than culling by humans. So stag hunting is one way, but that's more from the trophy side. But they still have to kill hinds, the females, as well, and that costs a lot of money, and it's very labour intensive as well. So that's the only way that we're controlling deer. So if you had wolves, they not only, like we talked about in their diet, what they eat, they would reduce the deer numbers by sort of direct predation, eating them. And then what we've touched about in so many podcasts, which I love this new concept, which I didn't fully understand before, but the idea of ecology of fear. So the fact that you've got wolves in the environment, they don't even need to be predating upon the deer. It keeps the deer moving, which means they're not staying in one place for long periods of time, which allows things like little shrubs and trees to regrow. So one sort of example where this could help restore and kind of regenerate landscapes is the Caledonian Forest. So this is up in Scotland, which once covered much of the Highlands, and it's been greatly reduced by people, sheep and deer, and it's about 1% of its former greatest extent.
Wow.
So a lot has been lost, and yes, people are involved, but also these out of control numbers of deer are playing a role. And so it's estimated that if we brought wolves back, this would be able to reduce the deer in the Highlands to around half their number.
Which is impressive, because I read a fact somewhere where it said that red deer numbers are now at an artificially high level because they've got no predators, and they've apparently more than doubled since 1965 in number.
Wow. Oh, yeah. I think that just gives you an indication of kind of how out of control it is. As lovely as it is for people to go, and the deer are a big attraction, it's a ecosystem that's completely out of balance. And also there's links with having lots of deer, you have more cases of Lyme disease. So that's something as well, that bringing back wolves could reduce Lyme disease in people, as well as kind of on animals as well. And then I guess it's not just the prey. We've talked about this before, but kind of having large apex predators can also suppress mesopredators. So smaller...
It's like a trickle-down thing, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. So you have things like red foxes, which are actually big killers of lambs and livestock. Like, they do take a significant amount of lambs and things like that. So if you had wolves, that would bring down the number of red foxes, which would reduce the predation of lambs, but also things like pheasant and grouse as well, because they're also taken by red foxes.
So there is a possibility that bringing wolves back actually benefits gamekeepers and people who keep livestock in Scotland.
Yes, no, definitely. And not only from that sort of the biological side, but do you want to talk kind of more about the financial side of that as well?
Yeah, so in case you might be thinking, oh, it's just a load of loony zoologists who want to bring wolves back for wolves' sake. And I do, I want to bring them back for wolves' sake. But there is actually a tangible and measurable financial and economic benefit, not to me as a zoologist, but to people in the areas where they might be brought back. So, deer stalking and deer culling is a very big industry in Scotland, and in fact the Scottish Gamekeepers Association identified it as the most important industry in the county of Sutherland. 112 people are in full-time employment in an area of 4,000 kilometres squared. That means that deer stalking, the most important industry, employs one person every 7 kilometres squared. Which does not sound like the most important industry is actually having that much of a benefit.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's quite a large area. Yeah.
And so these numbers are coming from an article, a paper, I suppose, by the Scottish Gamekeepers Association called The Economic Importance of Red Deer in Scotland's Rural Economy. And they actually put the numbers together. And so the income generated by deer stalking in Sutherland annually is 1.6 million, as of when this report was written.
Yeah.
And the expenditure on deer management is 4.7 million.
Wow.
That is a net loss, and
a
therefore
massive
stalking
one
can
as well.
Yeah, and stalking is only maintained because the bankers and sheiks and mining executive who own the land are willing to burn money on this pastime. And it is actually the few who own the land. Out of Sutherland's 5,200 kilometres squared, 4,000 kilometres squared is owned by just 81 estates. So there's a very high instance of land ownership here.
But I think also an issue to point out there is that something like deer stalking that is targeted towards the big stags. And since Victorian times, that sort of desire for... It still exists, the desire for stag hunting and that trophy aspect, but it's reduced. And so in order to control numbers of deer, they're also having to kill, or cull is a better word to use, large numbers of hinds, the females. There's very little economic benefit there because people don't want the same trophy as they get from the stag. So that is probably that expenditure. It's mainly the hinds and the females that they're having to kill.
Precisely. And so you might be wondering, well, okay, maybe deer stalking in Sutherland is not a viable industry. How do wolves make it a viable industry? Well, if you bring wolves in, both through direct predation and an ecology of fear, they will reduce the numbers of red deer. And so therefore the expenditure on deer management decreases, and therefore it actually might even out. You might have a net neutral. That might even increase because as wolves inhabit the ecosystem, stags are probably likely to get bigger because wolves will tend to take smaller individuals, the weaker individuals, therefore weeding those genes out of the gene pool. And because there's more food for each individual deer, because there's less deer in total, you may find that stags get bigger and therefore the value of the deer stalking industry actually increases for the people who are doing it. And obviously, this is a solution I'm putting forward that isn't putting the gamekeepers out of work. It's actually increasing the amount of work that they might be able to be employed in.
I think for gamekeepers it would basically could generate a profit rather than this loss that they're currently experiencing.
Yeah, and obviously wolves themselves, they would bring more money in terms of the deer industry, but they would also bring money in on their own right because obviously massive tourism, animal nerds like me and Emma will go and pay to stay in an Airbnb and pay at petrol stations to go up there and hotels to go and see these wolves and film them. And the amount of jobs that could be supported as wildlife rangers, the skills of gamekeepers and local people who live on the land would become so much more in demand as wildlife rangers or people who monitor the wolves or track them. And, we've talked about the Isle of Mull, the white-tailed sea eagles there. They bring in 5 million annually to the economy of the Isle of Mull. That is already more than deer management loses in Sutherland. And those are eagles. Imagine what we could do with wolves. Not to, bash the eagles, but imagine what we could do with wolves. And on the Isle of Mull, that's 110 new full-time jobs. So yes, there is a ecosystem benefit and an environmental benefit, but there is also a massive economic benefit, largely to the people who would live with these animals.
I mean, I think putting the numbers in really does show you how it's not just the wolf lovers talking here. This is numbers, this is economic benefits that they could bring. And also, like you're saying with the estates, I think this offers a chance for kind of reform within the big states. Like there have been some already, like Allerdale up in the Highlands, which has changed from kind of a traditional... I mean, yes, they cull for conservation purposes, but they've moved away from that and they are now have conservation rangers and they're really concerned about management of the forest and the land. And if you had wolves, that would make their job so much easier because at the moment they're having to fence these huge areas to let the trees grow back because the deer are eating them all. Yeah. So I think, lots of positives there.
We do know this can work. We're not just, chatting hypothetical nonsense. We know this can work because it's worked before in Yellowstone, which you may have heard of. It's a very famous kind of case study for wolf reintroduction. But do you want to kind of tell us what happened in Yellowstone? Because this is a lot of reintroduction theory is based off of what happened in Yellowstone.
Yeah, no, honestly, Yellowstone, I think it's still used today as kind of a case study example of conservation done right. I would say massive success story there with what happened. So basically, just a quick overview. There's so much information on this, but wolves were driven to extinction in Yellowstone in the 1930s due to hunting, and they were absent for 70 years from the national park. And what this sort of, you may have started to pick up on this, what we've mentioned with the predation of deer and things like that. So what happened was that the elk numbers in Yellowstone National Park, along with other grazers and herbivores, just exploded to the point that overgrazing was causing sort of mass destruction of flora, and meaning that if the big trees were being taken down, you lost a lot of the soil structure. You got a lot of erosion happening into the waterways. Basically, the land couldn't cope with the number of grazers that were there, and it kind of destroyed this natural interaction that you'd had, which was self-sustaining for so long when the wolves were there. And then, like we said, with the aspect of mesopredator control, without the top dogs, without the wolves, things like...
I see what you did there, that was good.
Very cunning. So things like coyotes increased hugely in numbers. And then you also had, with loss of tree cover, you had animals like puma that were sort of moving in, and brown bears were affected as well because they depend on vegetation. And so what you had is that, so puma numbers were decreasing as the elk basically congregated in these lowland areas, and so highland puma started to suffer. And just, I mean, I could go on and on. The effects of removing these wolves was so extensive that it caused ecosystem collapse. Basically, everything was out of balance and it was all going wrong, is the short story.
The long and short of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the bit which I always take away from Yellowstone is how wolves shape rivers. So you take away the wolves, the elk go out of control, they eat all the trees, nothing for the beavers to eat, so the beavers go locally extinct. That means the speed of the river increases, you get flooding downstream, all this erosion coming off the hills. But then what happens when you bring the wolves back? So the wolves come back, the elk suddenly are being eaten and can't graze all the time because they're looking over their shoulder. So trees can grow, beavers come back, they build their dams, changing the course of rivers. The hillsides get stronger because the trees are locking the soil up there. Pumas can increase in numbers because now elk are pushed into the forest to escape the wolves. And bears can come back in greater numbers too because now they've got all these lovely vegetation to eat. So it's a massive cascade if you take out the top predator, but that's not the end of the story, because if you put it back in, you can bring it all back. So you can think of the Highlands of Scotland as Yellowstone, in the 1970s. Ecologically, it's lost so much, but the wolf is one way we can bring all this stuff back.
I think that it just shows maybe we don't realise how much we've lost. We think of the Highlands currently in Scotland as, oh yeah, that's brilliant, there are so many deer there, the ecosystem's thriving. But when you look closer, it's very much similar to what's happening in Yellowstone. You've got overgrazing on a mass scale, which is having huge consequences. So I definitely think we can use Yellowstone and just scale it down a little bit for somewhere like Scotland. But just all the things that we've just mentioned could be restored in somewhere like Scotland if we brought the wolves back.
And the reason we keep mentioning Scotland and not, Berkshire is because Scotland, and in particular the Scottish Highlands, are really the only place in Britain which has all the things you need for wolf reintroduction. So you've got high populations of red and roe deer, so there's lots of prey. Human population in this area is far lower than in many parts of Europe, like eastern Germany, where wolves live today. There's very few roads, which means very low chance of car collision. And people have modelled this, and they reckon that the Highlands could support around 250 wolves, which should be a healthy population level with enough genetic diversity to keep the population viable. So obviously we've laid out, I think, some pretty convincing, benefits to having wolves. You've got all these restoration of ecosystem processes. It'll improve the health of the Scottish Highlands so much. And there's a big financial benefit as well. But let's not kid ourselves here, because there is a conflict of interest both with livestock and humans, and these are very high up the food chain animals. So we're going to discuss potentially some of the shortfalls of reintroduction now, because we do want to keep this balanced. And so, yeah, Emma is going to introduce this.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to recognise this. As much as we have outlined some positive things, bringing back an apex predator like wolves does pose a very realistic threat to livestock, and also to people to some extent, which can't be ignored. So wolves do actually prefer to hunt wild game. That's been found in several studies. But if there are food shortages, or if they happen to come into contact with human farmland and things like that, sheep are easier to catch. So there is a threat there. But just to give you some numbers to maybe reassure people out there who are like, you're all bonkers, like, why are we bringing back the wolves? They're really dangerous. Just to give you some numbers. So if you think about the impact of wolves on the sort of farming industry as a whole, their impacts are very small. So where you have sheep, in areas where you have wolves as well, in America, less than 0.1% of the sheep were taken and killed by wolves there. And this was a similar number, so no, not at all, and 0.35% in Italy. So that's sheep that were taken by wolves, where you've got them living alongside each other. And I guess one concern, we do need to address this, is that sometimes wolves will slaughter a large number of sheep in one go, because they often return to the kill for several weeks. So the idea is that they have enough food that they can keep coming back to. But I think something to say with that is this can easily be mitigated almost in a way by having compensation schemes. So in places like France, Greece, Italy, Austria, Spain and Portugal, an average of €2 million is paid out in compensation every year for farmers who have lost animals in wolf attacks, and another 2 million is put into preventing the attacks in the first place.
Which isn't that much money when you think about it.
No, it isn't. I think
it's still less than deer stalking cost management in the county of Sutherland, which is the study I'm just going to keep going back to, because it's true, it is less.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that could be a starting point if farmers feel that they're losing a lot more than that and need more income. I think that is something that the government should consider, because it is a real threat. But then this was an interesting question posed by George Monbiot, the author of Feral. Such a good book. We've said that so many times. But basically what he said is, are dangerous wild animals something that we choose to impose on other people, but not ourselves? We're very keen to invest in conservation groups abroad, where you've got people living alongside dangerous animals like lions, tigers, leopards, elephants, but yet we're paying to conserve them abroad, but we don't want them here.
And I also think we're very, very quick to judge, in that we're very quick to judge and condemn poorer people in other parts of the world for having conflict with these large predators, ignoring the fact that we are the ones who largely put them in this situation in the first place, with the awful ramifications of global colonialism by European powers. So yeah, there is definitely a bit of hypocrisy here. We turn our noses up at reintroducing the wolves, but we expect people in India to live alongside lions and leopards and tigers and not kill them, even though it is much harder for them to live alongside them, both because of the infrastructure and economic situation, which we are partly to blame for, and we are partly at fault in that. And so I find that hypocrisy does leave quite a nasty taste in my mouth, actually. Like, as someone who is half Indian, I don't like the way that feels. Like, we have a go at you when, you kill a tiger because it's taken 10 of your cattle, but that means different things to different people across the world, that loss. And I think the other side of that is maybe we are scared, and perhaps rightly so. There is a human threat to wolves. Wolves have killed people in the past, and we have a culture of demonizing wolves. The big bad wolf, which blows the piggy's house down, The wolf in Red Riding Hood, the whole werewolf thing. And a lot of that is from Norse roots. Wolves had a kind of an evil role in Norse mythology. Fenris wolf is the wolf that will cause doomsday. I was about to say D-Day. Doomsday in Norse mythology. Some of that is due to Christian and Judeo-Abrahamic iconography. The wolf has a very dark place in those kind of mythological landscapes. But it's largely a thing of the past if you look at the numbers. Unprovoked attacks by non-rabid wolves are incredibly rare, and almost all accounts took place before the 20th century when you had a large rural agricultural population. In the past 20 years in Europe, and Europe now has 20,000 wolves, in the past 20 years, 8 people have been injured and no one killed.
I think that's reassuring in itself.
Yeah.
I think people think the numbers are higher than...
Yeah. There are 50,000 wolves in North America and no one has been killed in the last 50 years. There is no rabies in Britain, so there's no reason that wolves would become rabid, and any incoming wolves would be quarantined and screened and vaccinated. And I quite like this fact, because it kind of reminds me that we always talk about shark attacks and, the odds of it happening. The chances of being killed by a wolf in Europe, even where they are most abundant, is less than the chance of being struck by lightning. So
I like that.
So, don't get me wrong. If we bring wolves back, we will have to think very carefully about how to keep walkers and farmers safe from them. But this isn't a pandemic of wolf attacks here. These are not animals which just run around eating people. It doesn't happen. The numbers aren't there. It just doesn't happen.
And I think, interestingly to point out, is kind of like, when did this idea of the hated wolf turn into beloved dogs, which are now our pets? So just to give you some numbers, something for you to think about. So there are 5,000 dogs for every wolf on the planet. And in England and Wales alone, there are 250,000 bites and maulings every year, with 6,000 hospital admissions and between 2 and 6 fatalities. This is every year from domestic dogs. So just to think about that, we are living alongside canids, and yet those are our closest companions and our dearest friends, whereas wolves are hated. Just something to think about there.
And a note on that, you might think, 2 to 6 people killed by dogs, wolves are so much worse, it'll be more than that. No, because we have dogs in our homes. We live alongside them. There's a proximity to statistic there. Yes, people get killed by dogs because we have dogs all around us and we breed them for specific traits, aggression in some breeds. Wolves won't be worse than that because they'll be in the middle of the Cairngorms where there is no one, and they're wild animals. They're not domestic. They don't crave social interactions with humans. If they see you, they will run off. There hasn't been a death by a wolf in Yellowstone Park for 62 years. And you get several million people going to Yellowstone, walking in Yellowstone every year, with no issue. So perhaps now is a good time to think about solutions to the conflict, because even though we can say there's no issue with safety, livestock impact would be small, we can't just say that. We need practical solutions, can't we? So one I quite like is this livestock protection collar, which we might have talked about with the lynx. I don't think guard llamas would work with wolves, because I think wolves
probably just get eaten.
Yeah, but a Swiss biologist has designed a collar which monitors a sheep's heartbeat, and if the heart rate raises, if it sees a wolf, for instance, when it's distressed, it will see a wolf, heartbeat will rise. It will send a ping to the farmer, and some of these collars actually carry a chemical. So when a wolf attacks a domestic sheep, it will usually go for the neck. So it will bite into this collar and it will release a chemical. You could have an emetic, so the wolf would then vomit, so it would know not to attack a sheep because it's going to vomit. You could also use a lethal compound. Those are 2 relatively cheap methods of livestock protection as well. There's also an element of do we shoot problem wolves? Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Because I feel quite,
This is an interesting one, because as a conservationist and a zoologist, the idea of shooting a wolf doesn't sit well with me. But I'm going to outline why it could actually be beneficial to shoot wolves that possibly make a habit out of eating sheep. Just know that this is me trying to get my head around this as well. So if other people are not sure about this, I'm going to try and tell you why. So if you had licensed wolf shooters, this could so it's the idea that they would control a small number that are being problematic, coming too close to humans, taking sheep. This could actually create a very powerful lobby for their protection. So if you think about anglers, they are actually one of the strongest defendants of fish stocks currently.
And we saw this with beavers. They are very powerful and very concerned about their fish stocks.
Yeah, exactly. So they are licensed anglers, and so the idea you'd have licensed wolf shooters as well. So that's one argument that they could actually be lobbyers for their protection.
And that's also another job created for the people who that's, a job with benefits and work hours and income and stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then another reason is that if people just think the wolves are running rogue in the Cairngorms and under no control, you're quite likely to get a lot of unauthorised hunting. Because people are worried, no one's doing anything, they're all going to eat my sheep, and so they will retaliate and go out and shoot them. Whereas if people know that the animals are under control, they're more likely to people think that their numbers are in check, they're being controlled, and they're less likely to be worried. And that can all be done under licenses rather than unauthorised just hunting, which would cause the population to sort of be unbalanced.
That's really interesting because, like you, the idea of killing an apex predator when we spend so much money trying to conserve them overseas, I inherently feel a bit but actually it's quite a viable and quite a practical solution, and it seems to have had a lot of benefits. And let's not forget that shooting wolves keeps wolves afraid of people.
Yeah.
And if wolves are afraid of people, they're less likely to come near livestock, and they're even less likely to go near people who are walking in the hills. So, what does everyone else think? We would love to hear your opinions. We're zoologists, so we don't like this idea. But I have to admit, on a practical scale, I could get behind this, I think. What do you think? Do you think wolves could be controlled in this way with licensed hunting? Or do you think if we brought the wolves back, no, we've just got to leave them, no interaction at all? So yeah, we hope this has given you a fairly balanced idea of wolf reintroduction. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we do our reintroduction feasibility, Emma?
No, just kind of to ask, do you think we should bring them back, and kind of maybe your top reason why, and then we can do our feasibility score, and then we'd love to hear what you think as well, because obviously a lot of these ideas are controversial and how to control them. So please let us know what you think. And
so this is us rounding off our wolf podcast, the animal where its reintroduction kind of spurred the whole theory of rewilding in the UK. I think, on balance, I'm going to give the grey wolf reintroduced to the UK a... Ooh. Do you know, I'm genuinely going to give it a 7.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm going to give it a 7 because, A, we've got the space, we've got the food, we have the... It's good for the environment, it's good for the people on the ground. The reason it's not higher is because there's still opposition among people. But the reason that opposition isn't bringing my score lower is because we do have viable solutions, and I think there's no problem to wolves in the UK which we couldn't answer with a bit of time and a bit of thought. I've certainly not seen any opposition, arguments or ideas where I've thought that's just damned the whole thing. I think we're ready. I don't think people are ready. I think Britain as a whole, we've got the space, we've got the food, we should do it. And obviously it shouldn't go ahead. It categorically shouldn't go ahead without the involvement and without the consent of the people who live where they will. It shouldn't happen because that's just a forced exclosure in the end of the day. But yes, I am going to give the grey wolf a 7. Emma, what are you going to give the grey wolf?
I might actually go...
Ooh, this is exciting.
I'm so conflicted. No, okay, I'm actually going to give it an 8.
Ooh.
Because I think we are ready, and I think a lot of people are concerned, and rightly so, but hopefully in this podcast we've addressed how some of these concerns could be mitigated almost to the point where they would be of no threat to humans or livestock at all, if there was enough education and compensation schemes, and possibly, like you're saying, the use of collars as well to give them that extra protection, maybe even with some shooting of individual wolves that were causing problems. So I think with enough education and sort of telling more people about wolves, I think we are ready to bring them back. So should we go for 7.5?
Let's go for 7.5. One tiny bit of livestock conflict mitigation, which just popped into my head. I know we talked about it with the lynx, but Sweden has a farmer's stipend, which farmers get an annual lump of money every year just for having carnivores on their land. It doesn't change whether they lose sheep or not. Every year they get a little bit extra just because they're putting up with this, which is another thing which could happen in the UK.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the last in our reintroduction series. We've given the wolf a 7.5. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the species which we no longer have, but we may bring back. And hopefully, I'd love to see wolves here, and lynx, and bison, and beavers, and wolverines. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Emma and I are working on a new series for Biome, a new podcast series that's going to come out very, very soon after this episode is aired. We've got lots of exciting new things we've got planned. And also on the Biome website, the link below, we've got camera trap footage we're putting up every week with badgers and foxes and beavers, so you can all check that out. And in the spring, Emma and I are very excited. We're going to try and go to the Isle of Mull to make a little film about the wildlife there. So this is not the end. Don't panic. Nobody panic. I'm not panicking. Emma, are you panicking?
I think I'm all right. And yeah, just if you want to check out more updates about podcasts, as Robi said, lots of exciting new stuff coming out. This isn't the end. You can check us out under the Biome podcast on YouTube, and then we are also on Instagram under Biome by Grizzly. And then, as Robi mentioned, we're going to be posting a lot of stuff about what we're doing, and maybe even one day we might get camera traps of wolves. That's
can't wait.
Maybe. So we are Hodson Wildlife and Robi Watkinson Wildlife on Instagram. So thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this. Please comment. It's a very controversial topic, and we'd love to know what you think. So yeah, we will see you in our series 2. So stay tuned.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.